Tässä kolmiosaisessa Via CRUCIS-ohjelmasarjassa puhutaan Kristuksen kuolemasta, ylösnousemuksesta sekä niihin liittyvistä todisteista. Tämä 3. jakso keskittyy Kristuksen ylösnousemukseen, tapahtumaan, josta koko kristikunta sai alkunsa. Onko ihmisen mahdollista edes alkaa ymmärtää tuon tapahtuman merkitystä? Ortodoksisen kirkon piirissä ylösnousemus on säilyttänyt keskeisen roolinsa ja pääsiäisen aikaan siihen paneudutaan aivan erityisellä pieteetillä.
Paastoaika on yhteistä kaikille kirkoille. Varsinkin ortodoksisessa kirkossa siihen sisältyy hengellisen paaston ja hengellisen valmistautumisen lisäksi myös sitten tämmöinen konkreettinen paasto, jota voidaan kutsua nimellä ruokapaasto, ja se on parhaimmillaan hyvin kokonaisvaltainen mielenmuutoksen, puhdistumisen, katumuksen ja uudistumisen kausi, joka alkaa siis 40 päivää ennen palmusunnuntaita. Tätä aikaa kutsumme kirkossa hyvin valoisaksi ajaksi, koska kuljemme kohti Kristuksen ylösnousemusta, ja myös kun valmistaudumme tällä matkalla pääsiäisen ihmeeseen, niin samalla itse kukin voisimme entistä kokonaisvaltaisemmin löytää itsemme ja toinen toisemme ja ennen kaikkea Kristuksen.
Risti, paasto ja muut pääsiäisrituaalit auttavat syventymään sekä kuoleman että elämän mysteeriin.
Tyhjä risti on selkeästi ja yksinkertaisesti sanottuna voiton merkki. Kuolema on jätetty taaksepäin. Kuoleman läpi on kuljettu ylösnousemuksen kirkkauteen ja Kristus kulki meidän edellämme. Ja sen vuoksi olisi toivottavaa, että paastokauden ulkopuolella niin kirkoissa ristit olisivat tyhjiä. Hengellisestä näkökulmasta voisi sanoa, että ne, jotka pelkää kuolemaa, pelkää elämää. Kun kuolema on jollain tavalla meillä silmiemme edessä, niin silloin tämäkin elämä tuntuu entistä tärkeämmältä ja ainutkertaisemmalta, ja otamme sen sitten hyvällä tavalla kokonaisvaltaisesti, aidosti, voisiko sanoa vakavastikin.
Oxfordin yliopistokaupungissa Englannissa asuvaa professori N. Wrightia pidetään yhtenä maailman tunnetuimmista raamatun tutkijoista. Hän on tutkinut Kristuksen kuolemaa ja ylösnousemusta ja on sitä mieltä, että tavallisten kristittyjenkin olisi hyvä perehtyä aiheeseen.
I think people have used the idea of resurrection simply as a happy ending after the story of Jesus' death. And certainly the way that churches commemorate Holy Week and Easter, it's very often they take Holy Week very seriously, and then Good Friday, the death of Jesus, we have very serious and sad services. And then on Easter Day we have a big party, and then, phew, that's all done, and we all go on vacation. and that's a real shame, because the Western Church really hasn't grasped the truth of resurrection.
Alkuseurakunnassa ylösnousemuksen voima oli paljon selkeämmin esillä ja ihmisten ajatuksissa kuin nykyään. Jeesuksen ylösnousemus mullisti kaikkien ajatusmaailman. Sitä ennen oli ollut itsestään selvää, että jos ihminen kuolee, hän pysyy viimeiseen päivään asti kuolleena.
Knowing that resurrection doesn't happen is not a discovery of modern science. Plato knew that, Homer knew that, Seneca knew that, Socrates knew that. Everybody in the ancient world knew that dead people stay dead. This is not a new discovery. So that when the early Christians went out and said to people, Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified, has been raised from the dead, they knew that everyone would think, you're crazy, what have you been smoking? That this is just out of line. But they said it has happened.
I was also surprised to find out that this story of the resurrection of Jesus was something which nobody was expecting. So it's true that in the period between the Old Testament and the New Testament, there was a general belief in resurrection. Previously, there had been a general non-belief in resurrection. The general tone of the Old Testament is, when you're dead, you're dead. That changed. But when it did change in the intertestamental period, the sense was not of the individual resurrection of one man before the others. It was of the general resurrection of all of us at the end of time, which might or might not be tied up with some messianic expectations.
Ylösnousemuksen arvo alkoi kristittyjen piirissä laskea jo keskiajalla. Silloin alettiin painottaa taivaan ja helvetin todellisuutta, ja ylösnousemuksen kokonaiskuva jäi puutteelliseksi.
Ever since the Middle Ages, the question of what happens eventually and what will happen to us after our deaths eventually has been polarized in terms of heaven and hell. If you think of the Sistine Chapel with Michelangelo's great picture of Christ in majesty, taking some souls up to heaven, sending others down to hell, or think of Dante, the great Italian poet, with heaven and hell and purgatory in between. And that has dominated the Western imagination to the extent that what the New Testament says about God's ultimate purpose has been lost, which is God's ultimate purpose is new creation, new heavens and new earth. If you go to a church here or elsewhere, probably in your country too, and preach this, people will say, that's funny, I've never heard that before. And the answer is, that's because we're not reading the New Testament right, because we are still trying to give answers to medieval questions. And if we went back to the first century Jewish world, we would see that things fall out very differently. New creation with resurrection in the middle of it. And that's stunning and exciting, and it opens up all sorts of pathways. And people today often say, it's interesting, heaven sounds awfully boring. You know, just sitting around playing a harp all day. You know, after a million years, that might get rather tedious. And the answer is, that's not what the New Testament's talking about. The New Testament is talking about God's new creation. And if you think what the creation already was like, where God makes this extraordinary world, where you have, you know, giraffes and waterfalls and wonderful trees and all sorts of extraordinary things, then what will the new creation be like? It won't be more boring than that. It'll be more lavish and different and things to be done and so on.
Ylösnousemus siis merkitsi uuden ajanjakson alkua. Jumala halusi luoda uutta maan päällä, ja hän halusi tehdä sen yhdessä ihmisten kanssa. Mutta ylösnousemukseen liittyy toinenkin uuden tyyppinen seikka, nimittäin ylösnousemusruumis. Sitä on tutkinut myös niin ikään Oxfordissa vaikuttava lakitieteen professori Charles Foster.
The main discovery was that the resurrection was hugely stranger than I thought it was going to be. So I think like many modern Christians, saw the resurrection as actually a resuscitation. Simply a body which had been dead, rise up with a little bit more life puffed into it. It's not like that at all. And lots of the difficulties in understanding the gospel writers' mystification go away if you see that the resurrection is much bigger and more mysterious than that. So the resurrection body of Jesus is something which appears to be able to walk through walls. Sometimes it appears to be able to be in two places at once. It is not simply Jesus' old body made to walk again.
You know, there's one amazing passage where John says in John 21, none of them dared ask him, who are you? Because they knew it was the Lord. And you think, excuse me, they've been walking around with him for 3 years. They knew him pretty well. You don't go up to somebody you know that well and say, who are you? But there was something different about him.
Tom Wright has this expression for it, transphysical. For humans like the apostles to see that transphysical body must have been extremely strange. And you can hear them scratching their heads and saying, I'm not quite sure what was going on here.
And when we then look and see what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, he says, our present physical bodies, which are corrupt and decaying, cannot inherit the kingdom of God, because the kingdom of God is a new, incorruptible creation. Now, our minds immediately go to Plato and we think, oh, if it's incorruptible, it must be non-physical. But no, the point is it's an incorruptible physicality. And the only model we have for that is Jesus himself.
Jeesuksen ylösnousemusruumis oli siis jotain, mitä ei ollut koskaan aikaisemmin nähty. Paavali kirjoittaa korintolaiskirjeessä näin. Ei kaikkien elollisten ruumis ole samanlainen, vaan ihmisellä on oma ruumiinsa, nelijalkaisilla omansa, linnuilla omansa ja kaloilla omansa. On taivaallisia ja maallisia ruumiita, mutta taivaallisten loisto on aivan toisenlainen kuin maanpäällisten. Auringolla on oma loistonsa, kuulla omansa ja tähdillä omansa. Ja toisen tähti loistaa toista kirkkaammin. Samoin tapahtuu kuolleiden ylösnousemuksessa. Se, mikä kylvetään katoavana, nousee katoamattomana. Mikä kylvetään vähäpätöisenä, nousee kirkkaana. Mikä kylvetään heikkona, nousee täynnä voimaa. Kylvetään ajallinen ruumis, nousee hengellinen ruumis.
This Jewish idea of new physical creation, of a transformed physicality, that you don't find that in Greek philosophy. And you don't find it actually, though some people have tried, in Iranian and other philosophies. You get tiny little hints of it about 1,000 years later in some of the Iranian texts, but it's a mainstream Jewish belief, which the early Christians say, we believe it because God has done it for Jesus. And they all say that right across the first 2 centuries.
Paul talks there about the transformation from a soul-ish body to a spirit-powered body. And the clear sense for anyone in the first century who read those words was that the spiritual body wouldn't be more misty, more ghost-like than the physical or the soulish body. Quite the opposite. It would be far heavier. A spiritual body would punch through a wall. In a contest between a spiritual body and a physical body, the spiritual body would win every time. And that's exactly the sort of picture that you pick up in the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus in the Gospels.
The meaning of resurrection was far more obvious for the early church because the early church was Jewish. Most of the Jews of Jesus' day were heavily influenced by the Pharisaic movement. Not all Jews agreed with this, but the majority did. For the Pharisaic Jew, resurrection was what God was going to do to all God's people at the end of time. What then happened, to their astonishment, was that one person got raised from the dead ahead of time. And this was like, that wasn't the game plan, that wasn't supposed to happen. But Paul is the theoretician who thinks it through and works it out.
Pääsiäisaamun tapahtumat sekoittivat koko Jerusalemin, joka oli pääsiäisjuhlien aikaan täynnä väkeä. Huhu tyhjästä haudasta kiiri pian lähes kaikkien juhlijoiden tietoon.
Hauta, mihin Jeesus laitettiin, oli Joosef Arimatelaisen hauta, joka kuului Sanheriniin, juutalaisten korkeimpaan neuvostoon, ja oli yksi kaikkein arvostetumpia jäseniä siinä. Kuinka voidaan ajatella sitä, että kaikki tietää, missä on Joosef Arimatelainen oli oman hautansa. Ja meni vielä itse hankkimaan käärilläät Jeesusta hautausta varten, mikä oli tavattoman epätavallista, kun ajatellaan, miten ristiinnaulittuja yleensä kohdeltiin. Ne heitettiin, niiden ruumiit, ne oli rikoksen tekijöinä tuomittuina, heitettiin yhteishautaan Jerusalemin eteläpuolella vaan Gehennaan. Ehkä poltettiin ja haudattiin, niin se olisi ollut Jeesuksenkin kohtalo.
Ne, jotka eivät usko evankeliumien kertomuksia ylösnousemuksesta, selittävät tyhjän haudan ilmiön muilla tavoin.
Was the body stolen? Well, if it was stolen, by whom could it possibly have been taken? It certainly wasn't taken by the disciples themselves. They wouldn't have been prepared to die for a story which they knew was fraudulent. The scholarly debate these days tends to assume that the tomb was indeed empty and then proposes various explanations for that. One explanation is that the body of Jesus was just slung on the municipal rubbish heap and was eaten by jackals. I don't think that's very likely because it would have offended Jewish sensibilities so much to have a body treated with that sort of disrespect. Another idea is that Jesus, being a Jew, would have been put by the Sanhedrin into one of the municipal graveyards of the condemned. He, being a blasphemer, wouldn't have been entitled to decent burial. But again, it was in the Sanhedrin's interest to rubbish the resurrection story as soon as it came out. So if they knew that that's what had happened, that they would have said so.
Joidenkin mielestä on mahdollista, että Jeesuksen ruumis olisi laitettu hautaan vain väliaikaisesti. Sitten se olisi siirretty sieltä pois ennen kuin naiset tulivat haudalle.
If you believe that to be the case, then you've got to assume that the body was taken out from the tomb by someone presumably known to Joseph and disposed of somewhere else before the women came on the morning of the third day in order to look at it. But Joseph would have known that the body hadn't really been raised from the dead. He was a religious Jew, and he, like everyone else, didn't have any of these expectations. He would have been wanting to help the Sanhedrin, of which he was a member, to tell the Orthodox Jewish story about Jesus, which was that there was no resurrection. So you've got to believe some really strange things in order to discount completely the story which is told in those Gospels. A few years ago, it was fashionable to try to assert that Jesus hadn't died. People thought that, maybe there was opium in the vinegar which was handed up to him on the spear. People say, isn't it weird that he appeared to speak his last just after the vinegar was handed up? Doesn't that suggest that suppressed his breathing, suppressed his pain, made him appear dead? Look, his legs weren't broken, which would have killed him. Doesn't that indicate that Pilate was in some sort of conspiracy to make sure that Jesus didn't die? It's plain that Pilate rather sympathized with Jesus and didn't want him dead, but there's a much easier way for Pilate to ensure that Jesus didn't die than to engage in this strange conspiracy in order to ease his conscience, get his wife off his back, for example. So I think that you've got to do some fairly strenuous believing if you're to discount these resurrection narratives. And I think the simplest story is that the Gospels got it right.
We have been taught by our culture in the Western world for the last 200 years that actually Christianity was part of the problem, not part of the solution, that Christianity was just a bit silly and we can grow out of it, and now we, the secular world, will do democracy, we'll do education, we'll do medicine, we'll do everything else. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work out like that. We had the French Revolution, we had various other things, we had 2 world wars, we had the Holocaust, we've had 9/11. Is that actually how the great secular utopia was supposed to be? And it's time for Christians to say, no, the kingdom of God on earth as in heaven is something very different. It's not us taking over the world by the world's means. It's about the energy which is released through the resurrection of Jesus, that Jesus' risen body is both the beginning and the energizing power for a movement which involves, as Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, Christians going out, the poor, the meek, the mourners, the hungry for justice people, the peacemakers. That's what it looks like when the kingdom of God comes on earth. And that is launched by the resurrection and then energized by the Spirit. So many Christians think of the resurrection as simply something rather odd but presumably nice which happened to Jesus, and something which is very odd and we're not quite sure what it means, but hopefully it'll happen to us. And I want to say, no, you're missing out. We live between resurrection mark 1 and resurrection mark 2, and therefore we have a job to do in the power of the Spirit. That's how it goes.
The world is a very strange and mysterious place, and there is a prima facie case that at the time of Jesus, the usual rules were broken. And it may be that in some future time, the very unusual rules which were shown in the resurrection will come to be the everyday rules. But be scientific about it. Be properly skeptical. And proper skepticism means putting your prejudices that this is a fairy story to one side and considering seriously, for as long as it takes, the possibility that this might really have happened, and that might be a simpler, more scientific explanation for the facts than the alternative.